Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. My name is Chris McGrane and I'm PT Maths at Holyrood Secondary in Glasgow. This afternoon we're going to be talking about curriculum design, task design, and some of the realities of leading mathematics in a big secondary school department. In Singapore, the curriculum rationale for mathematics is based upon this diagram here. And you'll notice their conception of what mathematics is and what's involved in mathematics learning goes beyond just procedures and process. It goes beyond conceptual understanding as well. There's a whole host of attitudes, skills, and metacognitive ways of thinking, self-regulation, all of which come together to embody what mathematical fluency is. And you'll see problem solving there at the centre, because that's the end goal. And I capture that essentially as procedural fluency, conceptual understanding, and mathematical behaviours. So in everything I'm doing, I'm trying to think about how are we hitting these three big ideas. Now, essentially what I'm talking about today is mainly focused at third level. And third level is important because it's the transition from elementary arithmetic to the more formalised mathematics which pupils are going to encounter later in secondary. It's kind of a key moment in their education. Every stage is key, but this is a linchpin. And too many pupils don't succeed properly at third level, which then is significant impediment upon what they can achieve later in mathematics. Now, there's an excellent report by the EEF, which is talking about improving mathematics in key stages 2 and 3. It's based in England, but it's applicable just the same for us in Scotland. And they have a number of recommendations in there. And these recommendations are fairly well backed in evidence, some more so than others. And these are things which trying to bear in mind as we go forward in our department. Something else that I think is quite important in my own thinking is Alan Schoenfeld's teaching for robust understanding. And he talks about thinking about observing a lesson through students' eyes. And there are different aspects to that which are important. There's the mathematics itself. Like, we've got to that subject integrity there. What is the big idea? How does it connect to what we already know? We've got to look at the level of cognitive demand. What cognitive processes are we asking pupils to undertake? Is it just repetitive drill exercises, or are we asking more of them? The equity, to what extent are pupils involved meaningfully in the mathematical learning? Is it done to them, or are they partners in that learning? The agency comes into that as well. And then perhaps fundamentally is the formative assessment that we use, which I'm going to elaborate on a little bit more. So these two pieces of research, I feel, kind of underpin much of my own thinking, as does this mastery word again. And don't worry, I'm not going to labour this because I know quite a few of you have heard me talk about this before, so I'm not going to talk any more than a minute on it. It was interesting listening to Fiona talk about it this morning, and mastery, she said, is something which has been about a long time. Now, teaching for mastery and mastery learning are not one and the same, although there are principles which overlap. And I would say I advocate for everything that Fiona said this morning in teaching for mastery. I perhaps wouldn't describe it that way, but she delivered a lot of positive stuff about mathematics education. This graph here is Bloom's 2 sigma experiment, and the idea here was you've got the conventional distribution of pupil achievement in a mathematics classroom, which is shown, and then you've got the distribution of achievement if pupils are given one-to-one tuition. And what you do there is you raise the bar and you close the gap. Now, obviously, for reasons of finance, and not having enough teachers to do that, we can't have one-to-one tuition. So Bloom said, what's the next best thing? It was this idea of mastery learning, because it was this idea, well, we can still have a significant impact on attainment overall. And this has been replicated many times, so we know this works. And very simply, mastery learning is we do a small instructional unit for 2 or 3 weeks. We give a formative assessment. If intervention is needed, then it happens, or some corrective work, remediation happens, and then another formative assessment. So pupils get a second bite at the cherry. For pupils who have already succeeded, they get some enrichment activities. The whole point of this is what we get high levels of success, which breed motivation. Motivation doesn't dictate success, it's success which dictates motivation. And then we move on to the next thing. This is important as well, because if you think about Jerome Bruner, people at Piaget, the ideas that they say is this building up incremental learning, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. We're talking about we need to be ready for the next bit. Now that in itself poses an issue, because maths, although it can appear hierarchical, isn't entirely. I'll come back to that too. Anyway, there's an unbelievable amount of research and reading out there on mastery. We know you get higher levels of achievement just by employing that little formative assessment cycle and changing nothing else. No pedagogical changes, no task changes, nothing else. Just employing that simple formative assessment cycle will raise attainment. And you'll see the name Guskey here. Tom Guskey is probably the person after Bloom. He worked with Bloom and he has continued that mantle. And his work in his book on teaching for mastery, you read about on my website. We've got a recent interview with Guskey, and he elaborates on that, so you can maybe tune into that going down the line. My own experiences in the past, previously when I was PT at Hillhead, you can see there just the difference in attainment in our third level, and that was by embodying some of this formative assessment and structural changes to how we went about things. It absolutely isn't a silver bullet though, there's much more to it than that. And these are what these diagnostic assessments would look like. So we've done a little bit of work here, and we're looking at pupils achieving the mastery threshold on each of these before we proceed, because these are fundamental building blocks, and that's essential. Now, normally when I speak at Stirling, I say something controversial, and I know whether to rein it in or not, judging by people's looks on their faces, but I can't see anyone's face today, so I'm not going to feel embarrassed, so I'll just be as controversial as I feel it being. That's meant to be funny. So mathematics is different. There's a lot of senior managers and what have you in Scottish education who will try and say, well, we do mixed attainment in English, or we do mixed attainment in geography, so we can do mixed attainment in mathematics. Mathematics is different by its very nature. The stark reality is that there is a 7-year gap upon arrival at secondary. Now, in our school, with 420 pupils in first year, we have at least 20 who are nowhere near, have nowhere near achieved first level. They are miles off it. And then we've got significant other numbers who are working just beyond that. We've also got pupils who are well ready now to be engaging with algebra and such like. So we want to meet their needs, we want to meet everyone's needs, and we want to make meaningful mathematical progress with them all. And we have significant numbers of pupils where there's a gap of 2 or 3 years in mathematical learning. Now, it's not super clearly defined, but there may be gaps in some topic, not in others, so it's not as clear cut all the time. So we need to bear that in mind. Now, I am going to advocate for some form of setting here, and people will often say, so what about social justice? And I find that incredibly patronising, to be honest with you, because I don't know a single teacher who would embark upon a career in teaching who didn't care about social justice and the well-being of pupils, both in terms of their achievement and as human beings. So social justice here, it might be a different means, but it is there. Now, I've already said that this third level, or Key Stage 3 in England, is the bridge from elementary mathematics to the abstract mathematical thinking of secondary. And we can look at Tony Gardner's book, Teaching Mathematics in Secondary Schools, for some more information on that. One of the key things here is it's about making sure we can get pupils to a stage where they're ready to engage with later on the National Fives and Hires and what have you, and actually succeed. Too many pupils arrive at National Five without so much of the fluency understanding, which underpins a lot of that. Now, the setting and the setting. If you've got what I would call a conveyor belt curriculum, which is essentially you've got your classes, you've ranked them in our department, you've got 15 or 16 classes in the year group. If you ranked in set 1 to set 16, and then you said we're going to do the TJ book cover to cover, chapter 1 to chapter 24, that's our first year, then yeah, I would argue that is pretty garbage. That is the sort of stuff that gives setting a bad name, and you've got different levels of book for each class that are what they are. Now, something more planned, something more responsive to pupils' needs, I think, is the advantage of setting. And this is not to say that mixed attainment can't work. I'm not saying that at all. It can. However, in the context I'm in, I know it's completely unworkable, just given the range of the pupils we've got and the teacher capacity in the department. So this master idea with that responsive teaching, we can help make gains in attainment for all pupils. And again, some of it comes down to teacher expectations. If you're putting your weakest teacher on the bottom set, then well, you're not, that is against social justice. You're not doing anything for those pupils. So you need someone whose expertise and who's working hard at first level and what have you to really help support those pupils. And we're privileged in my own school that we've got a primary principal teacher of mathematics who is in our department, who is working with these pupils, and that will hopefully make a significant impact as well. And sharing that expertise from pedagogy at those levels with second and third level, and we're all working together. Most of the studies on mixed attainment out there do not control for teacher quality. They don't always control for the setting. Is it primary? Is it secondary? Because there are differences there. And this study here, well, you can see the conclusion of it. Pupils made more progress if they were not in mixed ability schools at this stage. So we're keeping it at this stage at secondary. I'm not saying all-encompassing statement. So it's not as clear cut as what everyone would say it is in terms of mixed attainment's better. You don't. There are no massive success stories of schools in Scotland who have absolutely smashed the bell curve of attainment by doing mixed attainment at secondary level. There are the schools who are working at it and having success with it to some extent, but not in a massively different way. So, however, we had this here from UCL, and they had the do's and don'ts of setting. I'm not going to elaborate on that just now. You can read that. And subject specificity is in there, and flexibility. All these things are important. Now, the approach we've taken is essentially having mixed classes within a level, and that is a hybrid solution, because I can't say who belongs in set 1 and not set 2. I've got 16 classes or whatever. That would be unequitable. There's no way I can get the data to suggest that. So the idea here being that we've got 8, 9 classes at third level who are all equal. Your third level class, you're working on third level, and it's an equal class. The same with the second level classes, the same with the pupils working at first or early level. And the ambition here is, with that second level pupils, we're not going to repeat the entirety of second level. We're going to be focusing on the essentials and get you onto third level meaningfully as soon as we can. The lowest attainers, we're going to try and get you forward as fast as we can as well. It's not about going slow necessarily. It's about prompt, rapid progress, but deep understanding. So all of this, the setting stuff, okay, that's by the by, but It then comes down to the scheme of work idea, which is the map through the curriculum. And I've seen a lot of schemes of work which maybe the work of one person or something that's thrown together at the end of term, or it's covered in E's and O's and benchmarks, or worse still, it's just a list of textbook chapters. That document doesn't really give much. In my opinion, it should be much more, and you can see what it can be. I'm not saying I've got this perfectly by any means, working at a lot of stuff, but I think a scheme of work can be much more. This is what I had before at Hillhead, and this looks very detailed, and it's got the content, it's got resources, some teaching advice, and some formative assessments, some links to rich tasks and what have you. And this was all fine, but the problem with that is it was time consuming, and teachers sometimes prefer just to use a book. And I've kind of changed the perspective on it. Now, before I move on, this is from Tony Gardner, and I'm going to give you a moment to read this. This is when I interviewed him for the book that I brought out last year. So I think essentially what Tony's getting at here is coherence. Tasks in their own right can be powerful learning experiences if they're used well, but it's having a canon of tasks which are sequenced and put together appropriately, which can then define the curriculum, which is the way I've been thinking about it. So tasks on their own aren't enough, and just downloading random sheets from the internet, I don't think does it, which is why this year we decided to develop booklets which embody the best tasks that we can source from all across the past 50 years of mathematics education, and some stuff we've written ourselves to meet the needs of the cohort. And like I was saying about mathematics not being hierarchical, I sat the other night for 5 minutes and started just writing down some topics from National 5 and their prerequisites, and stopped because it's such an entangled mess. We might try and pick learning trajectories through this stuff, but it's very difficult. And in fact, we might want to come back to different nodes several times and layer up more understanding on them. So curriculum design is complex. However, there is some research out there on learning trajectories which can be useful, particularly in topics like fractions. And a learning trajectory basically is about having clear goals, developmental path, and instructional tasks which bring it to life. And that's what, again, I'm trying to do in the booklets I'm going to show you a little bit of today. You'll see here that textbooks in South Korea are developed by teams of mathematicians, mathematics educators, and mathematics teachers together. They bring together exploration, explanation, examples, practice, and extension. They're all in there. Japan is a similar system for high quality textbooks. So these trajectories through the subject are in there. There are many, many models. So this is one for fraction, for instance, which exists, and you've got the different meanings of fraction and then how they relate. And again, this is quite a different perspective, because if you look at the Scottish curriculum, for instance, I feel it's maybe a little bit too process focused. It's about dividing fractions and adding fractions and making equivalent fractions. But what about the meaning of fractions? What about partitive division and quotative division? What about understanding all of that stuff? How does that all fit in? What prerequisites do pupils need for what I'm trying to teach them here? How do I get conceptual fluency in addition to the procedural fluency we're going for? I'm sure we've all encountered, if you teach higher maths, pupils who, when you say to them, what is 1 divided by a quarter, they actually need to go and work all that out. They can't just tell you. So it's having the eye in the big picture, the conceptual understanding, as well as the fluency to do. So I sometimes feel that the overemphasis on procedural fluency can be an obstruction to real mathematical understanding. However, it is essential. You see here in Scotland some summaries of what they say about fractions here, and it's got a little bit more. There isn't a great deal of info on that, and even when you get into the benchmarks where it elaborates a bit more, I don't think it's clear enough as to what maybe we want the experience of pupils to be with fractions, and that's where you try to bring it to life. And again, comparing with South Korea, they're talking here about one strand of their learning trajectory, and what they've got here is they're saying, okay, well, to understand a whole number times proper fraction, sorry, a whole number times the mixed number, proper fraction times the whole number, proper fraction times the mixed number, and what they've got is some tasks there to bring that to life. And it's slightly different the way they've done it. And so again, what we're trying to do here in the curriculum is think about the sequence of tasks which illustrate not just the procedural fluency, which will also draw attention to the appropriate conceptual understanding. Here's a little task of my own. This is a story of 4/7, and we gave this to our S1s upon arrival because we did do mixed attainment for about 8 weeks at the beginning, and it was done diabolically. It was pitifully done. And you're looking here at and that might be the fault of the questions. My mum was a primary teacher, and I asked her about that one in the middle, locate it. She said that was badly worded. I'll take that on the chin. But the range of different understandings of just what that fraction is and what it represents and what have you, right over to the one about apples and bananas, that was, the kids found that extremely challenging. And that gave us a basis as well, we know where they're working from with this topic here. Now, it's then in the fraction booklet, out of a series of booklets we've got, it's looking at, okay, well, where are pupils, have they linked this to division? And so we've got tasks like this, which actually, yeah, I can go up and tell pupils things and what have you, but sometimes it's just about, okay, you pay attention to this and think about these different meanings of this same thing. Backwards and forwards, improper, mixed numbers, written calculation, and the actual quotient division. So we've got all of this together, backwards and forwards, and just paying a bit of attention to it. It's making connections, and then again utilising bar models and things like this as we go through the journey and thinking, okay, using a little bit of variations with tasks like this in there. And we know there's quite a robust evidence that there's a small to medium effect of pictorial representations at secondary level. I don't think it's quite as pronounced as people might say it is, because most of the research is small to moderate effect, but small to moderate is better than none, so I think it's worth including it. I've certainly found it to be positive for most of the pupils I've used these approaches with. And careful variation there, you see the 1/3, the 2/3, the 3/3, and so on. And then another example, just this is not the full booklet by any means, this is one booklet, it's just bits of them showing you here. Again, the sort of tasks we're looking for is tasks which, again, we're talking about procedural fluency, but we're also trying, well, can you visualize this? But also you'll see that like 1/3 of 6, but there's 1/2 of 6, 1/2 times 6. We're connecting those two things here at this early stage. Be careful not to overburden pupils with too many different meanings, but you're trying to get the conceptual understanding, the visualization, but also the fluency at the same time. Similarly, multiplication, this is just a model. There's many models to explain multiplication. I don't really want pupils drawing grids to multiply fractions, but at that early acquisition stage, it's fine to spend a little bit of time exploring the idea behind it, just so there's a little bit of rationale there. And similarly with division of fractions too, there's a little snapshot of a task. It's how many halves go into 2, just that idea there. So we've got all of these sequence of tasks which are there, which are designed to kind of draw out the mathematics rather than just 4 exercises consecutively in these different operations. There's meant to be a richer experience coming from this. That's what we're aiming to do. And then here we've got a structured variation grid. I knocked this together this week actually. I'm going to include it in the booklet for next year. And again, there's not many pictures on site, but the idea of this is you put it down in front of the kids and you say to them, well, fill in what you can fill in. And what they then begin to do is spot patterns, which enable them to fill in things that they don't really know how to do. And it's the rich mathematical conversation, the dialogue that comes from that. There are patterns in the horizontal, the vertical, and the diagonals here. And on opposite sides, you will see reciprocals and all sorts of stuff. And it's nice what comes out of it. So it helps pupils feel a sense of ownership in the learning. You don't need to tell them, they can just work through it. And particularly if they start just in the middle, like 1 divided by 1, there's always somewhere pupils can kind of get into it and make some sense of it. So I showed you some tasks there. I want to talk a bit more about tasks. Because when we give pupils tasks, I think it was Doyle who had a model of tasks, and what he was kind of getting at is there's the observable activity of a task, and then there's a cognitive activity, and then the product at the end of it. And we can see pupils doing all sorts of stuff, but that actually doesn't matter very much. What we need is to think about the cognitive activity. What are they actually doing? And this classification of tasks is quite useful for that, given a sense of, is this just memorization? Is it procedure without connection, or is it procedure with connection, or is it genuine problem solving? Without recency, without cue, having to use different strands of mathematics to think. And what I would say the booklets that we're developing probably have a bit of all of it, but the stuff I'm writing myself tends to be at that level too. I'm probably not good enough a mathematician to come up with lots of good problem solving questions, which are genuinely unique and novel, but thankfully people at the UKMT, Enrich, and so on are, and there's lots of nice stuff out there. But those procedures with connections is something I quite like doing and coming up with, as you've seen a few examples of that already. This as well, this is from Better Mathematics. It's a report from 1987, and it's thinking about junk food versus junk mathematics. All the nasties are removed. Simple and laid out in steps, but maybe not always the best way. That retention's a big deal, and there needs to be some context in there. Now that's obvious. This diagram's there for effect, but again, it's thinking about that there's got to be places that, like, we know too much about cognitive science now to know that at the early stages of acquisition, we know about cognitive overload, we know about working memory. We probably do need some element of structure and logic and small steps for certain things, but it's about fading that out and embracing the complexity of the material that we're discussing. This is a rough working curriculum outline. It's changing all the time, but basically here, I've shown this a few times at Stirling. One of the things that influences the curriculum design that we're putting in place is the idea of, well, what are the key linchpin topics at National 5 Mathematics? And you'll see some of them here. This was based upon the 2016 National 5 exam. This was the percentage of National 5 questions where these further level skills appeared. These are absolutely essential for progress later on. The phase 1 topics, it was area, length, some order of operations using visual models, which was basically an extension of area. You'll see that in the booklet if you go on my website and download it. And some early fraction work, which was mainly second level in nature. And the idea of these topics here, where they could all be accessed on different levels, so we could run it effectively mixed attainment and it wasn't downtime, and the teachers were able to make it a success. However, later in the curriculum, we felt that some of the algebra and so on, if you're going to do it meaningfully and it's not just manipulation of symbols and you want proper understanding of functional relationships and so on, then it probably had to be the kind of set structure we were going for. So yeah, the choices of where things come will develop over time, but you'll see it's not about doing it all in one go. There's a bit of integers, then we'll come back and do a bit more integer work later and so on. And arithmetic essentials, to see what that is, again, go on my website and have a look at that. So one of the key things here is that we've got a connectionist perspective. It's about making connections across topics. The last time I built a curriculum, it was too discrete at times, so fractions, decimals, percentages. And I didn't tear down the walls between things. And this time that's what I'm trying to do, is to tear down the walls between topics a bit more, in the way that sometimes our textbooks don't do, to allow the connections to come out. Using methodologies which are forward-facing, so teaching pupils in a way which will give them the mathematical instruments which will enable them to succeed in the future. So teaching a forward-facing model for solving equations, like balancing, using inverses, so additive inverse, the multiplicative inverse, and so on. Stuff that will always work and won't break later on in the maths. And again, that question of atomizing things down, I think maths is a little bit more muddy than that. So sometimes we're tackling more than one thing in more than one place. And I think that's maybe a sign of the maturity and the understanding of curriculum, I suppose, coming out. The course order topics, I see someone's asking about that. Essentially, it was just the building blocks. Like, I'm not going near solving equations until pupils have mastered integers. I don't want pupils solving equations where I have to say to them, well, you can't do those ones because this is going to happen, or you have to do it this way. So that doesn't, I just want them to be able to embrace the mathematics as it goes. So that was kind of part of the rationale there. So the booklets, as I say, they're not just random sheets put together. That was the issue with the previous curriculum I had at Hill Head, where I showed you the hyperlink document. There was lots of nice tasks, but maybe it wasn't as coherent as it could be. The attempt this time is it's still a planned journey, but what we've got is a unification of the models and metaphors we're using. So algebra tiles, for instance, is in there. It's something we're using coherently throughout some of the algebra and the negative number work, for instance. It's making sure we've got a nice rich diet of tasks. The other thing about these booklets is it's to help to convey the meaning of my curriculum to my department. I had all these nice ideas before, but all these dry, austere documents didn't really do it. And although you have professional dialogue and DMs and what have you, more effective is actually just giving teachers a booklet and we spend the DM looking through it, discussing the tasks. Oh, that's interesting. Why is that there? I don't like that one, and so on. And having that conversation is useful, and it teases it out. I found much more people are clear on what we're doing, and also we're changing pedagogy. A lot of people are embracing some of the ideas around the different visual approaches. For instance, the booklets support that in a way. If we stuck to a conventional textbook, they wouldn't support that. So it's to help take all of that along. So that is some of the rationale for the booklets and bringing that together. And I'm going to take you a quick tour through a little bit of one of the negative number ones. So this is some of the stuff in here. And again, so you think about this either from the pupil's perspective or from the teacher. And by the way, this isn't to say this is all the tasks that teachers can use. Like I'm not at all totalitarian in the way that I run the department. This is the basis, but you know, go off, and if you think there's a better task, go and use it by all means. What we've done here is we've eliminated the pathway through the topic that we think is right. And these are some of the key teaching points. If you want to address them a different way, that's absolutely fine. But make sure the kids see these models, because if they're not in your class next year, then they will be using these models. So make sure they see it. So we've got the metaphor of the zero pairs in there, some chat about the additive inverse. Very scaffolded, adding negative numbers worksheet here, and it's like rewriting it using the positive and negative symbols rather than plus and minus. Kind of went out of fashion in the 70s, I think, that stuff, back in the old SMP days, but I still think there's a bit of value in that. We've got using the tiles, and then we've got it in words in the answer. And for staff who hadn't used this approach before, they quickly run through the worksheet themselves, and it helps to illuminate it for them too, as much as for the pupils. There is tasks in there which are, there's some structured pattern spotting at the top, or using, you can see that. Then there's some mixed practice, and then there's copy and complete each of these tables here, and there's a little bit more flexibility and thinking been demanded, but not that much. So that's fairly routine, that stuff. But then what you want to do is you want to take the mathematical thinking up a notch. So we've got this task here in the booklet, which is about generalizing. give me examples of, for instance, a positive plus a negative where the sum is positive, a positive plus a negative where the sum is 0, a positive plus a negative where the sum is negative. Or you're going to have situations where it's not possible and the pupils have to do that. So this idea of learner generation, we know about the generation effect as well. So we're tapping into that. It's a bit more cognitively demanding again. So it's about getting enough fluency, but then coming around at it. And you also want to use multiple representations. So this is an old SMILE worksheet, which we've incorporated. So yeah, we're using the algebra tile, the zero pair, additive inverse metaphor, but we're also looking at the number line as well. It's not about one or the other. Both can complement understanding. One will click better for some pupils than others. And the idea here is, again, we're looking at the same thing from two different perspectives, and it's that richer connectionist perspective on the mathematics. Then again, coming at the subtraction of the negative numbers, the language here been very important. It's not 5 take away 2, it's positive 5 minus positive 2, which is 5 plus negative 2, and so on. And coming at all these sorts of things here. Moving it on, it's generalising once more. This was inspired by Don Stewart. I knocked this together, and the idea here is we've got some numbers, and they're represented by these counters. This was actually part of a discussion on Twitter. I put up an exercise, and this kind of emerged out of conversation with a few people. I think Neil Tilson was one of them. And this is kind of where I ended up with the task. And again, this is much more cognitively demanding than simply doing the calculations, but it really helps to solidify the learning conceptually and in terms of fluency for pupils. And then you're looking at, well, some target calculations, like using some combinations of these. Can you make this? And so on. So you're trying to give a range of tasks in here, combining multiples and so on. And the same sort of thing when you go into multiplication and division and so on. And you want to sometimes pay attention to small details. It's not about atomizing every single thing, but you think, well, you know, this is something that kids make mistakes on later on. We're going to talk about it. Like, I have the conversation every year with higher pupils that if you've got a negative to an even power, you're going to get it out to be positive. If you get a negative to an odd power, it's going to stay negative. Let's talk a little bit about that when we're doing negative numbers earlier. Let's talk about fifth roots and sixth roots and so on. And we've got here, like, come up with an argument and so on. And again, more fluency, but like demanding, it's like you've got order of operations and things, and that's from the mathematics enhancement project. So again, I'm not claiming to have written all of this by any means. We've stolen the best of the material from out there to pull together something. Algebra as well. Our algebra booklets, I'm showing you a couple of slides of these, and the idea of the algebra booklets too is trying to build up a coherent journey, but also tapping into what pupils already know. We've done some area models, we've done some work on this sort of stuff. So you're building it up. Well, can you draw me a diagram for these expressions? How would they look? So that's cognitively quite hard. But you notice how we're then in substitution. And you know, you could then draw the diagram and substitute the numbers into the diagram to work this out. So there's a whole host of stuff going on there. Some of them are obviously three-dimensional or more, so you can't draw them. But for some of the simple cases, that's another strategy we have here. So there's a whole host of stuff going on in the algebra booklets where it's more layered, and rather than just, oh, we're doing substitution for a week, then we're doing this for a week, it's a bit more integrated over the piece. Again, looking back, this is what I found fantastic model from one of the old SMP books, because it's to me, algebra is something which it's so fundamental to everything we do at secondary mathematics, but too many pupils, we get procedural fluency, but often not much more. And what we're trying to do here is make sure that kids understand, because with understanding comes insight, comes ability to problem solve, perpetuates, we can raise achievement and so on. And linking this up, this is talking about the order of operations, it's developing functional thinking, this sort of stuff, that 3a plus b is 3 times the a plus the b. When I was at school, the calculators were not these nice natural language calculators. You used to have to type everything in the proper order, but backwards. It was 5 plus 3 times the 2 to make it work and so on, or 3 times the 2, then bank that in your head, then I'd advise you couldn't just type it in the way you see it. And I think we've lost a little bit of that. So having tasks like this here, again, well, we're taking in the metaphor for collecting like terms. It's the same metaphor we had for the negative number work. So pulling all of that together and having that there. So it's layered up. And then again, matching up. So it's not just about fluency, it's about understanding and meaning, which again, with one eye on National 5, because we're thinking about change of subject and so on. We're thinking about functional relationships later on. And can you match up these statements with the correct expression? So moving forwards, there's a whole host of work to do, and I've barely scraped the surface of some of these booklets, but the whole idea I'm trying to get at here is it's like the booklets basically are a manifestation of the curriculum. They are, if you think back to that node diagram, that network I showed you, they take not just one pathway through it, but they try to crisscross a little bit through that network at the third level. And we've built stuff for second level as well, but there's probably too much copyright infringement in that for me to be able to put it up on the internet. Whereas with the third level stuff, it has been from people who have willingly shared. But moving forward, it's where I want to go with this is it's planning for retention a bit more. So building in more work on the space and effect interleave practice. So every booklet having some mixed practice on everything that has come so far in the curriculum. Going back to having a homework policy of every child every night, which we successfully managed to get in place in a Glasgow school in the past, so see no reason why we can't do it again. However, because of changes in curriculum content and so on, haven't yet put these booklets together, but we'll get there with that. And the other thing about this mastery cycle is I want to digitize the assessments. I want to get to a point where it reduces the workload on teachers, but gives us better outcome, better feedback, which we can use. And that's something I'm currently looking at as well, because we're very fortunate in Glasgow that we've got devices for every child. We've got iPads for every pupil. And I think it'd be remiss not to utilise that in some way. Shameless plug for a couple of things. Last year brought out this book with Mark McCourt, Mathematical Tasks, and it's 350 pages of theory about task design, why tasks are important, principles of task design, talking about problem solving. It comes at I try to be balanced. It doesn't come at mathematics from what you call the trad or the prog perspective. I think it's somewhere in between. And the caveat with that, like everything I've said today, is there's definitely some of it that's wrong. Because I was looking at old slides I've given from presentations that's still in the past, and I cringe at some of the stuff I've said before. But that's all part of the learning process, and we're all learning together as we go through this. But Anne Watson, Professor at Oxford, read the book for me, and she seemed to agree with most of it. So before it went to print, so I think that was a good endorsement. So if you're looking for a bit of light reading, have a look at that. Also, I have been running some online workshops. It's a pre-recorded course on task design, which I didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of how to design tasks at all today, but there's 3 hours of content there. You can see the details of that on my website as well. And finally, the website itself, because I've referred to it quite a lot. On the website, there's quite a lot going on in there. You've got lots and lots of individual tasks. There's the curriculum booklets. I've got a section for higher maths, a section for primary maths. I've now got some interviews on there as well. And there's a whole host of stuff getting added in all the time. And what's been nice as well is that people who have participated in the task design workshops have been contributing tasks as well, which I've been uploading, which is enhancing the kind of richness of all of this. At this point, there's a couple of minutes left, and I think for the first time in history, I've finished early. If anyone's got any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.